said Patience, with a little mock ceremony. Edward did so without replying, and was ushered into a large airy room, very neatly furnished. "This is your future lodging," said Patience. "I hope you will like it." "Why, he never saw anything like it before," said Clara. "Yes, I have, Clara," replied Edward. "Where did you?" "At Arnwood. The apartments were on a much larger scale." "Arnwood! Oh, yes! I have heard my father speak of it," said Clara, with the tears starting in her eyes at his memory. "Yes, it was burned down, and all the children burned to death." "So they say, Clara, but I was not there when it was burned." "Where were you then?" "I was at the cottage where I live now." Edward turned round to Patience, and perceived that her eyes were fixed upon him, as if she would have read his thoughts. Edward smiled and said, "Do you doubt what I say?" "No, indeed," said she. "I have no doubt that you were at the cottage at the time, but I was thinking that if the apartments at Arnwood were more splendid, those at your cottage are less comfortable. You have been used to better and to worse, and therefore will, I trust, be content with these." "I trust I have shown no signs of discontent. I should indeed be difficult to please if an apartment like this did not suit me. Besides, allow me to observe, that although I stated that the apartments at Arnwood were on a grander scale, I never said that I had ever been a possessor of one of them." Patience smiled and made no reply. "Now that you know your way to your apartment, Master Armitage, we will, if you please, go back to the sitting room," she said. As they were going back into the sitting room, she said, "When you come over on Monday, you will, I presume, bring your clothes in a cart? I ask it because I promised some flowers and other things to your sisters, which I can send back by the cart." "You are very kind to think of them, Mistress Patience," replied Edward. "They are fond of flowers, and will be much pleased with possessing them." "You sleep here tonight, I think my father said?" inquired Patience. "He did make the proposal, and I shall gladly avail myself of it, as I am not to trust to Phoebe's ideas of comfort this time," said Edward, smiling. "Yes, that was a cross action of Phoebe's, and I can tell you, Master Armitage, that she is ashamed to look you in the face ever since. But how fortunate for me that she was cross, and turned you out as she did. You must forgive her, as she was the means of your performing a noble action, and I must forgive her, as she was the means of my life being saved." "I have no feeling except kindness towards Phoebe," replied Edward. "Indeed, I ought to feel grateful to her, for if she had not given me so bad a bed that night, I never should have been so comfortably lodged as it is proposed that I shall be now." "I hope you are hungry, Edward," said Clara. "Dinner is almost ready." "I dare say I shall eat more than you do, Clara." "So you ought, a great big man like you. How old are you, Edward?" said Clara. "I am 13. Patience is past 16 now. How old are you?" "I am not yet 18, Clara, so that I can hardly be called a man." "Why, you're as tall as Mr. Heatherstone." "Yes, I believe I am." "And can't you do everything that a man can do?" "I really don't know, but I certainly shall always try so to do." "Well, then, you must be a man." "Well, Clara, if it pleases you, I will be a man. Here comes Mr. Heatherstone, so I know dinner is ready. Is it not, sir?" "Yes, my child, it is," replied Mr. Heatherstone, kissing Clara. "So let us all go in." Mr. Heatherstone, as was usual at that time with the people to whose party he ostensibly belonged, said a grace before meat, of considerable length, and then they sat down to table. As soon as the repast was over, Mr. Heatherstone returned to his study, and Edward went out to find Oswald Partridge, with whom he remained the larger portion of the afternoon, going to the kennel and examining the dogs, and talking of matters connected with the chase. "I have not 2 men that can stalk a deer," observed Oswald. "The men appointed here are verderers, and keepers have not one of them brought up to the business. Most of them are men who have been in the army, and I believe have been appointed to these situations to get rid of them because they were troublesome, and they are anything but good characters. The consequence is, that we kill but few deer, for I have so much to attend to here, as none of them know their duties, that I can seldom take my own gun out. I stated so to the attendant, and he said that if you accepted an offer he had made you, and came over here, we should not want venison, so it is clear that he does not expect you to have your pen always in your hand." "I am glad to hear that," replied Edward. "Depend upon it, his own table, at all events, shall be well supplied. Is not that fellow Corbould, who is leaning against the wall?" "Yes, he is to be discharged, as he cannot walk well, and the surgeon says he will always limp. He owes you a grudge, and I am glad that he is going away, for he is a dangerous man. But the sun is setting, Mr. Edward, and supper will soon be on the table. You had better go back to the house." Edward bade Oswald farewell, and returned to the attendants, and found that Oswald was correct, as supper was being placed on the table. Soon after supper, Phoebe and the men servants were summoned, and prayers offered up by the attendant, after which Patience and Clara retired. Edward remained in conversation with the attendant for about an hour, and then was conducted by him to his room, which had already been shown to him by Patience. Edward did not sleep much that night. The novelty of his situation, the novelty of his prospects, and his speculations thereon, kept him awake till near morning. He was, however, up in good time, and having assisted at the morning prayers, and afterward eaten a most substantial breakfast, he took his leave of the attendant and the two girls, and set off to his return to the cottage, having renewed his promise of coming on the following morning to take up his abode with them. Billy was fresh, and cantered gaily along, so that Edward was back early in the afternoon, and once more welcomed by his household. He stated to Humphrey all that had occurred, and Humphrey was much pleased at Edward having accepted the offer of the attendant. Alice and Edith did not quite so much approve of it, and a few tears were shed at the idea of Edward leaving the cottage. The next day Edward and Humphrey set off for Lymington, with Billy in the cart. "Do you know, Edward," said Humphrey, "what I am going to try and purchase? I will tell you, as many kids as I can, or goats and kids, I don't care which." "Why, have you not stock enough already? You will this year have 4 cows in milk, and you have 2 cow calves bringing up." "That is very true, but I do not intend to have goats for their milk, but simply for eating in lieu of mutton. Sheep I cannot manage, but goats, with a little hay in winter, will do well, and will find themselves in the forest all the year round. I won't kill any of the females for the first year or two, and after that I expect we shall have a flock sufficient to meet any demand upon it." "It is not a bad idea, Humphrey. They will always come home if you have hay for them during the winter." "Yes, and a large shed for them to lie in when the snow is on the ground. Now I recollect, when we used to go to Lymington I saw a great many goats, and I have no doubt that they are to be purchased. I will soon ascertain that for you from the landlord of the hostelry," replied Edward. "We will drive there first, as I must ask him to recommend me to a tailor." On their arrival at Lymington they went straight to the hostelry, and found the landlord at home. He recommended a tailor to Edward, who sent for him to the inn, and was measured by him for a plain suit of dark cloth. Edward and Humphrey then went out, as Edward had to procure boots and many other articles of dress to correspond with the one which he was about to assume. "I am most puzzled about a hat, Humphrey," said Edward. "I hate those steeple-crowned hats worn by the Roundheads, yet the hat and feather is not proper for a secretary." "I would advise you to submit to wear the steeple-crowned hats nevertheless," said Humphrey. "Your dress, as I consider, is a sort of disgrace to a cavalier born, and the heir of Arnwood. Why not, therefore, take its hat as well? As secretary to the attendant, you should dress like him. If not, you may occasion remarks, especially when you travel on his concerns." "You are right, Humphrey. I must not do things by halves, and unless I wear the hat I might be suspected." "I doubt if the attendant wears it for any other reason," said Humphrey. "At all events, I will not go to the height of the fashion," replied Edward, laughing. "Some of the hats are not quite so tall as the others. Here is the shop for the hat and for the sword belt." Edward chose a hat and a plain sword belt, paid for them, and desired the man to carry them to the hostelry. While all these purchases on the part of Edward, and many others by Humphrey, such as nails, saws, tools, and various articles which Alice required for the household, were gathered together, The landlord had sent out to inquire